It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host, of course, here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast in Canada, the U.S., or beyond. It is great to have you here. Please tell your friends, family, enemies, neighbors, whoever. Just let them know about RealAg Radio and join this fun community of content. Okay, today we've got a RealAg Issues Panel, and the whole show is this Issues Panel. So we're going to have a lot of fun here today. There's 4 segments dedicated to covering the top issues and news, things that happened, and really breaking down what it actually means to you in your farming and ranching operation. We're going to be joined by Tyler McCann. He's the managing director at Kappy, based in Ottawa. We're also going to be joined by, of course, Lindsay Smith and Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture. Some of the topics that we got on the list today, we're going to talk about this gene editing poll. Now, Pete and I discussed this on Monday's program. I want to get the Issues Panel response to the fact that dealing with nitrogen use is the number one response in the poll when it comes to what do people want to see gene editing do. It's interesting, and I know the panelists have some thoughts and maybe had some other picks that they thought would be number one, so we'll get to that. Also, a bigger talk about the capital gains changes and what potentially it could mean for the industry. Kelvin's got some numbers to shed light on how dramatic the impact could actually be for people that maybe bought land in the 80s and maybe in 2025 look to sell one of those quarters, and the amount of taxes you're going to be sending to Ottawa is not going to have you pleased. As well as a very prominent person in Canadian agriculture, Murad Al-Khatib of AGT Foods, has some pretty strong words for not only the current government, but the potential next Conservative government when it comes to needing clarity around the clean fuel regulation, all of that, and, of course, a whole lot more. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all of the different social media platforms, or you can call the RealAg feedback line. Now, that number is 855-776-6147. Okay, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to get to the RealAg Issues Panel right after this.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch WheatPete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify.
I am Lindsay Smith. Joining me now is Rob Meyer for Genesis Fertilizers. We can't have this conversation without, of course, an update on where the Genesis plant is at as far as plans.
An announcement, many probably know this, was recently made to expand the production capacity of the nitrogen plant in Belle Plaine. You know, a plant with the capabilities to provide not just urea, but also urea ammonia sulfate, the UAS, as well as the DEF, that's the diesel exhaust fluid component, with future plans now in play to install the equipment and also produce UAN. So if you really think about it, that package, these upgrades are not only going to make the plant more flexible, I think that's a key ingredient, but more profitable for the farmer owners. We're entering the spring. Farmers are thinking about their businesses, their crop plans, their fuel, their fertilizer. We're right in the mix of it right now with, incredible experts, and we're pushing this project. It's a great time to be on board.
And Rob, for those interested, where can they go for more information?
Visit us at genesisfertilizers.com.
I'm really looking forward to today's show. We got this RealAg Issues Panel is going to be fantastic. There's so many things that happened this week, and we got a frequent guest going to join us here as well to participate in the RealAg Issues Panel. I'm your host, Shaun Haney. Hey, do you want to use PGR in your cereals but no time for a separate pass manipulator? PGR can be applied as early as 1 tiller. Just add it to your herbicide to reduce lodging risk, increase harvest efficiency, and of course, maximize yields. Talk to your local retailer for more information and make sure you confirm those acceptable tank mixes. You don't want to put the wrong two things in the tank together. Bad stuff happens. So make sure you confirm those acceptable tank mixes. Okay. First up, Lindsay Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lindsay, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. That's all I've got. I'm just doing well.
You know what? It looked like Ottawa here this morning. It was pouring rain here in Lethbridge.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. Yeah, well, actually, I'm super happy for everyone in Southern Alberta. That's fantastic. But we are still wet and not a lot of field activity is happening, and people are getting a little stressed, a little grumpy about it. Looks like things are going to improve a little bit here, so we'll keep going. We'll see how it goes. And I will just note the lilacs have started to bloom, and with them have come the black flies. So
you said they were bad, like Manitoba.
Oh, they're awful. Yeah, they're really bad right now.
No, I was in Cuba for a holiday. This is going back, I don't know, 5 years ago, and the beach, like the sand flies, they got me.
I'm telling you, insects can ruin a good time. Anyway.
No kidding. That's why, just if any questions, just spray. Okay. Also, I'm not sure that's good agronomic advice. Watch out for those beneficials, everybody. Okay. Also joining us is Kelvin Heppner, coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, I was seeing some, it was Gunther Yoakum out of Manitoba. I saw some of his Twitter videos yesterday, getting some rain as well.
Yeah, some major rain in parts of the province. Some severe weather rolled through yesterday. And so here at our farm, we just had a sprinkle, but not too far north. And in Gunther's area, it looked like there was a fair bit of water ponding on the field. So, and hail in some areas. We had our first tornado warning yesterday as well. So I've kind of told myself, made a rule though, that I'm not going to talk about the weather on this show anymore, because last Friday I said we would have clear sailing for planting for the foreseeable future. And I think we've had a day, maybe 2 days of time in the field since then. So as soon as we talk about the weather in Manitoba on the Friday Issues panel, it seems like things go the other direction.
And if you haven't turned a wheel or upset about Kelvin jinxing the weather, his email address is kheppner@realagriculture.com.
Exactly. So the Leafs in the
Although
playoffs.
I've only had one mosquito so far. I've only noticed one mosquito so far this spring. What? So you're welcome to come to Manitoba to enjoy the relatively bug-free conditions right now.
I'm on my way.
You know, I invited Stuart Person from MMP to be on today's panel as well. But you know what? I think fortunate for him, he couldn't make it because his Oilers lost last night. How about those Canucks, everybody? Also joining us is Tyler McCann. He is managing director at Kappy. Hey, Tyler, how's it going?
Good, Shaun. How are you?
We're doing good. Hey, who are you cheering for in this Oilers-Canucks matchup?
I don't have much stake in this race, but probably go Edmonton just because. And just hoping, though, that if Kelvin can jinx things and have an impact, maybe we could talk about kind of how crappy things are going in this country and get that turned around.
Usually that's my line of shtick. So, and you're always like, wait a minute, Shaun, it's not broken. Why are you coming in with such negative sentiment here today when it comes to things that are happening in Canada? What's got you bothered, Tyler?
I don't know, just one thing after the other, it seems these days, Shaun. But again, I don't know, farmers, if we can't talk about the weather, can't talk about how bad things are going, maybe we'll have a hard time filling a radio show today.
So what do you think is particularly going bad?
Well, so I think that there's just this compounding series of things. So I think in general, in agriculture in Canada, we tend to talk a lot about how good things are and how great things are going. And I think I'm increasingly convinced that actually we need to do a more job talking about how things aren't going as well as they are. And so we can dive into kind of any long list of things. Certainly, I think a lot of this in the context of the federal government and public policy in the country. But I don't know. I think that list of things that aren't going in the right direction is pretty long these days. That doesn't mean that the country is broken, and I want to make sure that I'm not coming across as too dour, just that there is a lot of room for improvement. Yeah.
Well, Kelvin, was you that shared let's talk about capital gains changes. And Kelvin, you saw some numbers, I believe, yesterday very interesting in terms of how these capital gains changes, if implemented, how they could really impact farmers. Talk about that.
Yeah, we're starting to see some of the math that's been done by some accountants that are working through different scenarios, specifically in farm situations. And so you have different farms where, say, often a farmer, let's say, bought their land in the 80s or 90s. It's certainly accumulated a lot of capital gain in value since then, if you look at what's happened in the farmland market. And so if they're looking to sell now, sure, it's only a low percentage of Canadians affected on an annual basis. The federal government talking about decimal point worth percentage of Canadians affected directly. But if you look at it over a 10-year time span, let's say, or a 15, 20-year time span, it's a much higher number. I don't know the exact. I haven't seen that modeled or estimated yet, but I'm curious what it would be. I think way more. So this is the situation where a lot of farms, business owners, doctors, all the different professionals that are when they look to sell their business, it's often a one-time life event, maybe a couple times in their life where they have a major sale of something that they have built. That's where that capital gains comes into effect. And so I think we're starting to see, as business owners get an idea of what this, and their accountants tell them what this could do, we're starting to hear more noise about the negative impact this will have on investment in capital and in businesses, investment in growing things here in Canada. And I think, like you said, Shaun, we actually haven't even seen the legislation introducing this tax change that's supposed to take effect June 25th. And so there's some talk that it will come in early June, but a lot of the details we don't even know, or in terms of the devil being in the details, some of that isn't all confirmed yet either, because we actually haven't seen the legislation. And that's led to some speculation that the precedent with this current federal government, if you look at the small business tax changes, you look at the underutilized housing tax policies, there's been some announcements where they've had to pull things back. And so I think there's some people questioning whether there's a hint or the door might be cracked open to that happening with the capital gains changes as well. Not sure that we should get our hopes up.
They're going to feel encouraged, though. There was new data out yesterday, polling from Abacus Data. And one of the reasons that, the justifications the government has on this capital gains change is that we need to benefit younger Canadians. This is, we have an unfair system for them. And when you look at in the poll, people between the ages of 18 to 29, there's actually only a 1-point difference now between the Conservatives and the Liberals. Liberals had a big jump, up 12% between April 29th and May 15th, Lyndsey. I think this kind of gives some fuel to the Liberals to proceed here, does it not?
Yeah, they don't vote anyway, so why does it matter? No, I'm just kidding. No. That's the cynic in me. No, okay. So to me, though, it definitely shows, I guess if you're a Liberal and want to find some good news in all of this pomp and circumstance that happened with this budget rollout that happened over weeks instead of a day, it is some positive news that it certainly looks like some of these changes are resonating with, that demographic. I think that in some ways, though, it probably has a lot to do with, people in that age group not fully understanding what a capital gains tax like this actually means to them in the long term, because they're just so far removed from maybe that being the issue. To Kelvin's point, yes, every year a small percentage of Canadians would be impacted by this, but it's not the same people year over year. It's different people every year as they transition their business to the next generation, who, guess what, are probably in that demographic right now that just had this bump on the Liberal side. They don't recognize that, like, if they want to, buy a business, an existing business, it's going to impact them, because the person retiring or getting out of it is going to essentially have to hand over a giant chunk of money to the government, a bigger chunk than before, which means if they had a goal of X amount of dollars for retirement, they now have to charge more to the incoming generation to end up with the same amount of money at the end. So I think that part of it...
How's that for generational fairness?
Exactly. How is that fair? And it actually negatively impacts these people who are, in their 30s and potentially in the next few years want to buy a business. So the other thing I found interesting is, yes, we're waiting for the details, and we haven't seen the implementation side. But we also, there is talk of, with this June 25th deadline, is there a rush of transition that happens, of sales that happen, and that, of course, injects a whole bunch of money into the government coffers here. Just the threat of this happening does that. So I'm not saying that was part of the plan, but it ends up benefiting this government's certainly on the side of what they could do with some extra dollars in the budget.
Tyler, if you're a conservative strategist, how concerned are you about this poll from Abacus this week?
Well, I think it's worth noting how low the bar is set on the Liberal side for good news, right? They will seemingly take anything that they can get these days. I don't think it's a huge. So I can't imagine the Conservatives are too terribly worried at this point in time that their lead really is quite significant and quite substantial, and I think far beyond probably any of them expected it would be 6 months ago. So I don't think it probably worries too much. But I think it's worth noting that, the Conservatives themselves have not been very vocal on the capital gains tax. I think, there's this issue where politically it is probably not very appealing to be seen to be pro-business and pro-growth in the country. And this understanding of how important capital investment is, or the lack of understanding about how important capital investment is broadly in the population, should concern us all, right? Like, one of the things that's not going as good as it should be in agriculture and broadly across the Canadian economy is capital investment. It was one thing to see investment dip during COVID, but it's largely been flat in this sector, and it's an issue. Trevor Tombe had a professor at the University of Calgary, had a really good column in the Hub pointing out that it's not just the capital gains tax. The government is changing the accelerated capital cost allowance, and that's going to have an impact where it's going to take taxes on new investments in agriculture from 8% up to 11.6%. It is going to add an extra disadvantage to investing in agriculture. And these changes are happening across all of the sectors in the country. Manufacturing is going to see its effective rate go from 3% to 9%. I don't understand how this is the direction that people think we should be going in this country. We should be driving those investment taxes down to encourage even more investment, to put us on a more level playing field with others. But I don't know. With the way the world works these days, it's just not a popular thing for governments to run on or parties to run on. But we need to realize how much of a negative impact that's having.
I heard, and this is the real impact. And this was two entrepreneurs outside of agriculture that said to me, currently in exploration, because of this trend and some of the things that you've been talking about, they're thinking about moving their business outside the country. Which that article that Tyler just mentioned, written by Trevor Tombe, also talked about a recently published paper, a study done here in Canada that it published in the Canadian Tax Journal, showed that since 2000, 90% of all labor productivity gains were from investment in more capital per worker. So what are we doing to our productivity too if we're discouraging investment in that capital? Yeah, good point. Hey, we got to take a break. We've got more coming up here on the RealAg Issues Panel. You're listening to RealAg Radio, of course, on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Hi, it's Bruce with Ag Direct Hail Insurance. This season, Ag Direct Hail is proud to support prairie farmers by taking the unprecedented move of keeping our crop hail insurance rates at or below 2023 prices. With the many challenges facing farm families, this is our way of thanking producers who work hard to put quality food on our table. You have our back, and Ag Direct has yours. Visit agdirecthail.com or call us toll-free. We appreciate your business.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Even though Kelvin has jinxed all of you and you can't get out in the field, you still got to think about emergence. Vaterstad is partnering with Canadian farmers for outstanding emergence. Their line of tillage, seeding, and planting equipment offers solutions for all soil types, field conditions, and of course, tillage practices, helping you to maximize yield. To learn more and find out all the information, you can go to visitvaterstad.com. Kelvin's giving me the evil eye right now. It's okay. We'll move on. We've got Tyler McCann here, Managing Director of Kappy, Kelvin Heppner, and Lindsay Smith both of Real Agriculture. Now, Lyndsey does a great job every week putting a new poll up at realagriculture.com. And this week's poll, a lot of voting on this one. And we asked, what problem do you want gene editing to address first? By far the biggest answer was nitrogen fixation. That's at 33%. The second one is drought at 18. Okay. It's interesting that drought gets mentioned a lot as one of the real benefits that are going to be worked on here when it comes to gene editing. Tyler, you pointed out in sort of a pre-discussion that you're surprised drought's so low. Talk about that.
Well, so I think, again, it's always, there's a lot of motivating factors clearly around what's important, but given how much drought's been in the news, given the experience that farmers are having across the prairies in particular, I would have thought that drought would be more of a top of mind concern for farmers. But I think that there's a couple of, I mean, we often hear that yields are more resilient than they used to be. I think our practices, our seed varieties have come a long way in bridging that drought gap already. But I would have thought that that would be something that farmers are more concerned about. I wonder how much of their lack of concern is around the fact that they can rely on things like crop insurance as a bit of a buffer. I don't know how much to get into that, but yeah, drought seems to have been in the news on a pretty regular basis. I would have thought that that would be the thing that keeps people most up at night.
Fertilizer's a cost, drought isn't. It may be that simple. Yeah. Lyndsey, you had a perspective on this.
Yeah, so I also think drought is not something they can control. Their nitrogen bills are in some ways, right? So how much nitrogen we buy is fully within our control. Whether or not a drought happens is not. I mean, to Tyler's point, we have had adaptations, whether it's using no-till or zero-till, swapping out crop type, better varieties that have just better drought tolerance in general. So I too am kind of surprised that, and not surprised in that nitrogen, especially in the last little while, it's been very expensive. We have crops within, whether it's west or east, that fix their own N, and we know how much of a difference that can make on our profit margins and on our input costs. And so, so not surprised, but also, a little surprised that because we've had such widespread drought, over Western Canada, and it's been so devastating just in the last 5 years, and we tend to have short memories, it is a little surprising. But I think part of it is also what we can't control, right? And drought is one of those things we can't. So
well, and everybody hasn't been impacted. Sorry.
Yep, that's true too.
Not everybody has been impacted by drought.
Yep, that's true. If I may, just on this note, we did offer an other in this one. And which we don't always, sometimes we want to make you choose, but we did offer. And so so one of the ones that wasn't an option, but was offered was frost tolerance, which sort of is in the same line as drought tolerance, but herbicide resistant weed control was one of the things that was, and I'm not sure how that works. If we can, I know that it does occur in other things like insects and these sorts of things, where if you modify the actual pest, it either it can't reproduce or it can't whatever. But that one was not one that really came up, but so neat to see it offered up as one of the options.
There was one other one, Lyndsey, that you haven't mentioned.
That's right. Yeah, thank you, Kelvin, for pointing that out. We often, when we make these polls, we try to make it so that, you have to make a choice, and that it's not always about the Liberal government. But someone did, of course, say getting rid of Trudeau was what they wanted gene editing to tackle. So, thank you for that, whoever put that in there.
Tall task.
Yes.
But the fact that nitrogen fixation need was the number one priority speaks to in my mind, one of the failures of the Liberal government, because when we go back to the fertilizer emissions reduction target, they should have been able to spin that and communicate that clearly in a way that's good for farmers. Clearly, nitrogen use is a major concern for farmers. It's their number one issue here when it comes to gene editing. I don't understand how you couldn't say, look at a big solution to a big benefit of dealing with nitrogen fixation, nitrogen use, is reducing those emissions. This should have been a winning issue for farmers, for the environment. You should have been able to spin that. Again, they clearly screwed up the communications of it. The inability to say whether or not this was based on emissions or use, or kind of speaks to some of the challenges they have. But this is you could use this as a proxy to say number one issue for farmers. Clearly, it should be a priority, not just for gene editing, but for kind of the broader research agenda around how do we drive down nitrogen use.
I want to just shift here and talk about the clean fuel standard. There was some interesting comments from Murad El-Khatib this week or it was last week at the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce Food, Fuel, and Fertilizer Conference. And Murad they're a part of the FCL project, right, Kelvin?
Yeah, AGT and FCL had announced a new canola crush plant in Regina, but it's kind of been on hold or still under review.
Yeah,
since hasn't been any shovel in the ground as far as we know.
Perfect. Okay. So he said, we believe in the project. We've been working very hard to secure the federal government's policy framework. We need clarity on the clean fuel standard. We need clarity on what the government's position is going to be. I think that this is important, really another important part here. I think that this country has lost track of the fact that we can't ram everything through the Port of Vancouver all in 4 months' time every year. What was your reaction to what he said about this, Kelvin?
Oh, I think he said we need to know what the government's plans are going forward. I think that's a direct message to Mr. Poilievre's office and the decision makers in his office. What is a conservative government? If, according to the polls today, if we have a conservative government in the next 18 months, what are they going to do with the clean fuel standard? Because that investment in canola crush capacity and processing into that renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel supply chain in Saskatchewan is dependent on it needs to work over the long term, not just in the next 18 months.
Funny, we had this exact same conversation this morning on AgriTalk relating to biofuel tax incentives, and everybody wondering what's going to happen to them post-November election if there is a Trump administration. Will they kill those? And what one thing a capital investor doesn't like is political risk. They don't want to invest hundreds of millions of dollars and then realize that based on a change politically, that the rug is pulled out from their feet. Tyler, this seems to be a bit of a parallel issue running on both sides of the border here.
And I think it's easy for, especially a lot of your audience, Shaun, to dismiss the environmental agenda and the green agenda as bad for agriculture and bad for farmers. But if you're a canola grower on the prairies, and there are tens of thousands of them, that green agenda is creating a really important domestic market for your product that's going to continue to add value. And if you look at some of that slide that we've seen in canola prices, that value is needed. And the governments have tried to do some interesting things to insulate from that political risk. They're rolling out what they call contracts for difference that effectively lock in the value of a carbon price that removes some of that political risk. But we need to understand that we can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to environmental policy and after the next election. If we want to see canola crush capacity increase and value-added biodiesel processing increase, we need to maintain that regulatory framework. And I think we need to be clear, and we need to have much greater certainty than what we have today.
Yeah, Lyndsey, I've said this before, that I think the Conservatives have made the same mistake as the Liberals have when they combine two issues. And so they have made the CFS, the second carbon tax. We don't hear that as much anymore as a speaking point, that they've sort of dropped that a little bit, but they were very much emphasizing it. And I think that gives investors some pause in terms of, well, wait a minute, you're talking to axe the tax. Are you axing both of these? And we know that you can actually be pro biofuel and not be for the carbon tax. Mm-hmm. And I think we need some clarity from the Conservatives on what a conservative government would be doing with biofuels.
Well, and I think, the statement that Al-Khatib makes is that, I think it's a very direct one, of you are the government in waiting, so show me what you're going to do, to the Conservatives. Because this is very much what we need. We need to know, what this is going to look like. And we segued from the gene editing question. The reason CFIA's decision has got everybody's so excited is that it's a decision. It lays out how Canada is going to handle gene editing going forward. And now plant breeders know what the path is going to be to get through the regulations. It sets out that path to say, okay, now we can work towards this. So plant breeding companies can actually work towards a goal. So now we've got, all of these projects either in the works, on the books, but maybe as Kelvin says, maybe not a shovel in the ground. Realistically, I completely agree. You can be pro biofuel and not pro carbon tax. Like, these are very different things. And let's not, really discount how important the canola industry to Western Canada and Canada as a whole. Like, this is a huge, huge industry already with amazing opportunity, but we need clarity for those capital investors, for the movers and shakers, to be able to go forward and say, this is the regulatory environment we're going to be working towards. Granted, we can't do anything about what the U.S. decides, but we can keep track of what they're doing and dovetail into it. But this is where we need leadership on this to actually lay out what it's going to look like, and we need to know what the Conservatives plan to do.
Well, we definitely need the U.S. to have demand for renewable diesel, because I don't know what the heck we're going to do with all this renewable diesel we're going to produce. So you'll get the last word here, Tyler, but I do want to mention, if you go back to January, we asked about the policy impact of the Clean Fuel Standard. Canadian farmers neutral, not seeing a real super positive impact here of the Clean Fuel Standard on their farming operations. Tyler, wrap up.
Yeah, I think it highlights the odd dynamic we're in today, where the federal election is 18 months from now, but everybody's effectively assumed that the Liberals have lost. Investors are looking at it and trying to figure out what it means, but that's still a really long time from now. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect the opposition party to say, here's how we're going to govern, but we are in such a weird space that, some days that election can't come soon enough.
Okay, let's take a break. Tyler McCann of Kappy, Kelvin Heppner, Lindsay Smith of Real Agriculture, myself, Shaun Haney. We'll be back right after this.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
It's now time for a product spotlight, joined right now by Lauren Cummin. She's the Director of Policy at Seeds Canada. Okay, we're going to talk about a very important topic, and that is seed regulatory modernization. What needs to happen from your point of view?
Well, right now, Seeds Canada is talking and has been talking for quite a while about the need for balanced, refreshed governance in the seed regulatory system. To allow us to keep pace with innovation, our framework needs to allow for continuous improvement. An independent advisory committee will not only provide a framework for consultation, but it also provides a balanced governance structure that reflects the modern seed sector today. And the sector is concerned that rather than focusing on these bigger picture pieces that are going to get us to where we need to be, we're focusing on minor edits to what we already have, and in some cases, proposals to even go back in time. We really want to see a return on investment for everyone's time and resources going into SRM. And we want to be able to compete moving forward.
If you think back to, I think it was last week already, time flies, we had Dennis Laycraft from the Canadian Cattle Association on the show here, and he had mentioned that there's going to be a big meeting in Mexico. And that meeting has happened, and a joint statement has been produced, and because he's a sharp guy, Kelvin picked out an omission in that joint communique that I find very, very fascinating. Kelvin, what was left out?
Well, I can first say what was in this letter. So it was signed by the U.S., Mexican, Canadian, and Australian cattle groups. So there were actually four different countries represented at this meeting in Mexico this week. So it was the Mexican Cattle Association. I won't try my Spanish here, but their annual meeting took place earlier this week. And so the joint letter that they issued was that they would work together on foot and mouth disease and other disease threats that could affect trade. They also talked about the importance of cattle in protecting the environment and things around air quality, water quality, land preservation, and those types of things that we, of course, have discussed at length as well. Also, lab-grown protein being a concern in that it shouldn't be allowed to be replacing directly beef because it doesn't meet certain characteristics and those types of things. So those are some of the priorities mentioned in this letter, this joint statement from the leaders of these cattle groups. But notice I was, I guess, expecting them to at least address, and it wasn't mentioned in this letter, the product of the USA label, the voluntary cool that is on the horizon in the US, as well as the review of the North American Trade Agreement, USMCA or CUSMA, with that review coming up and potential impacts on trade and the integrated supply chain there. So just noteworthy that it wasn't mentioned in this joint statement from the four countries that met in Mexico this week.
I have to think, when we saw this week the tariffs being applied to China, we saw also former President Trump say, well, if you're going to do 100%, I'm going to do 200%. Tariffs are game on south of the border, protectionism rising. We've been telling audiences this through the winter in some of the speeches, and of course on this show. If you look at tariffs, if you look at things like product of USA labeling, if you look at the review that's coming up when it comes to the USMCA CUSMA agreement, there's some very, very choppy waters ahead for Canada dealing with its largest trade partner, I think, Tyler.
And I'm a little surprised that as we see the government roll out the Team Canada approach that's supposed to better position the country in the United States, that we haven't seen agriculture more involved and engaged in that process. The agriculture minister doesn't seem to be involved. Agriculture stakeholders don't seem to be playing a big role, but this is incredibly, vitally important to the future of the success of the sector. If you look at any projections, as much as we take it for granted, the U.S. is by far our largest market, and that relationship's important. But beyond that, the impact of a potential global trade war will have these really huge ripple effects, and I'm not sure we're prepared for the fallout of that. And we may hope that we'll get saved from a 10% Trump tariff across.
Nope.
There will be huge unintended consequences of it.
Yeah, I hope there's not a plan. Lyndsey, I think whether it's a Trudeau government or it is a Poilievre government, I think this is of equal great challenge for Canada to navigate through here.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that, there's arguments on both sides of who's the better matchup with Biden or with President Trump if he ends up in office again. I think there's arguments for both, for and against. And I'm not sure really that I see, to Tyler's point, to just this overarching increase in protectionism and, and the states really just focusing on itself. I don't know that Canada, that it really matters, I guess. I think this is a tough haul regardless of which party is in power and which leader is there. I think that realistically, Canada is not in a great position going into this. And partially, like to Tyler's point, I don't know that we've perhaps been as proactive as we could be. Also, I think that on the grand scheme of things, while we may be the U.S.'s neighbor and we're a good neighbor and we're an important customer and they're, obviously a huge market for us, we're also pretty small on the grand scheme of things. And the U.S. is going to do what the U.S. wants to do. And I don't know that, any prime minister candidate could really solve that. I think that somebody could make it much worse. But I don't know that we are in for a tough go here, regardless.
I think we better be getting ready to meet that 2% GDP obligation with NATO if we want to do any sort of sucking up, Tyler. Anyway, go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, but I think it may be true that we may not be able to influence the White House. And again, it's not just Trump. The impact of Biden's escalation on tariffs in China can have significant consequences. But what we can do is be prepared. And what we can do is plan. And what we can do is develop some sort of meaningful or ambitious strategy or approach to deal with all of these consequences. And we can't even seem to get that figured out, Shaun. And that's where I think we can it's very easy to sit back and say, look, we can't influence the decisions of the U.S. president, but we are responsible, and it is up to us to be masters of our own domain. And I think we need to do a much better job of getting our act together when it comes to that.
Yeah. We were sharing an article link that kind of ties into this, and the new farm bill in the U.S., where it hasn't, it's working its way through the process. It's not anywhere near complete yet, but number that stuck out to me is that we're going up $23 billion in potential subsidies. That's a 56% increase. There's also talk this week, could we, if you look at the playbook when it came to Robert Lighthizer, when he was the USTR, and now Catherine Tai, who's the USTR, they're kind of cut from the same cloth. One's a softer version of the other. The next part of the playbook is MFP payments, subsidizing farmers for trade mitigation losses. So, Kelvin, there's a lot of money being potentially thrown, working its way towards American agriculture. That also hurts Canadian competitiveness.
Yeah, for sure. And that has to be one of our concerns. And at times, Canada has, we like to be able to sell into China as well as into the U.S. And I have a feeling that U.S. direction on all of this is going to force Canada to pick a side. And that's hurt our export potential into China as well. And so I'm not sure in terms of planning and preparing for this, should we be doubling down on our supply chains into the U.S. right now? Do we need to just further enhance that relationship? And because I'm in the longer term, or medium to long term, to me, the exports to China would seem more at risk. Of course, China, it's always a matter of how high or how strong the demand pull is from that country. But at the same time, I think if the U.S. forces Canada into this having to choose sides, we have to choose the U.S. Of course, they're our biggest ally, our biggest neighbor, our biggest market in so many different categories. It's to me, that's the only. It looks like that's the scene that we're setting up here. Okay, we'll continue this conversation. We got to take a quick break. We'll be back with more of the RealAg Issues Panel. Shaun Haney, Tyler McCann of Kappy, and Lindsay Smith, along with Kelvin Heppner. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Choose Viatude fungicide and unleash best-in-class sclerotinia protection in canola and premium protection against white mold in soybeans. Viatude contains a powerful premix of Onmira Active and prothioconazole. This unique combo delivers high-performance disease control, crop safety, mix compatibility, resistance management, and advanced mobility for excellent coverage and superior plant protection. Choose Viatude fungicide for stronger, more vigorous crops.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Lindsay, what I find interesting is we were just talking about the nitrogen fixation being the number one answer, the gene editing vote, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you don't necessarily have to wait for gene editing to help you with this problem. Do tell, exactly. Mm-hmm. Invita, right there. It bridges the nitrogen gap all season long, enabling your corn crop to fix the nitrogen it needs from the atmosphere when and where you need it most. Let Invita set the crop up for success by requesting it from your local retailer. Okay, Shaun Haney, your host, joined by Lindsay Smith, Kelvin Heppner of Real Agriculture, along with, of course, Tyler McCann, Managing Director at Kappy. We were just talking about trade between Canada and the U.S., and there's definitely, I don't know if there's choppy water. It feels like it's like big waves coming, like it's capsizing a boat. Serious stuff. But Tyler, related to the value chains and the integration and what Canada looks like versus what it needs to look like, and what are the risks associated with that? Kappy's working on a new report related to risk. What are you up to?
Yeah, thanks, Shaun. So what we're trying to do is go out and get a better picture across agriculture and food around what are the risk opportunities that are the risks that are keeping people up at night. What are the opportunities that they think will drive the future success? I think you guys have done really good work with the Farmer Sentiment Index and that regular kind of checking the pulse of farmers across the country, but we don't do a very good job of checking the pulse of the entire value chain, right? The success of the farmer is only as good as the success of the processor. We tend to operate in silos in our own distinct commodity or regional value chains. And so what we want to do is take a step back and say, okay, people in agriculture and food across the country, tell us what you're worried about and tell us where you think that the country should go. And really what we hope is that this helps drive a much more focused discussion around what should government policy do? What are the strategies that we need to have in place at the end of the day? But ultimately, the success of the survey and the report will come from the people that fill it out. And so if people want to go either to any of Kappy's social media channels or go to our website, they can click on a link, fill out the survey. It takes about 12 minutes of your time. Pretty easy to do. Please do that. Tell us what keeps you up at night and tell us what you think government should be working on. And we will hopefully be able to use that to drive better policy outcomes at the end of the day.
How would you answer that, Kelvin? What do you think needs to happen? What does the shift have to be?
Well, that's a big question, and I think it might depend on the sector. But I think this is also bringing us full circle in our conversation today in terms of investment in capital and needing to drive that investment in things that drive productivity and increase productivity and all of these issues, big issues that we continue to hear about and themes that have been resonating over the last number of months. So, yeah, I would say one example would be tax policy that incentivizes investment in capital, which is the opposite of what we've seen over the last in the federal budget last month.
Yeah, we had Farm Credit Canada CEO Justine Hendricks on the show Wednesday. It was, and there's a shift there, trying to bring more capital into the market, maybe more patient capital. I just, if you missed that, that's on Wednesday's show, but I actually just saw on LinkedIn, JP Gervais, chief economist with Farm Credit, he shared the link to that interview, and he says this is directly related to increasing productivity in the country. Now that's a tall order, but go ahead.
I'm going to add to my answer. I think we need to move on from this culture of the government and government arm's length organizations are going to solve all our problems. We need to move on from that culture too.
That's a cultural thing. I don't know how we got there though, but we're there, right?
Feels like so, Shaun, we do ask the question, what do you think government priority should be, but what should the private sector priority be too? Because we do think that we need to drive more of that private sector leadership, but we ask questions about what are the risks that concern you, and then we ask how confident are you that government's going to be able to address these? And I tell you, the answers aren't very good. People are not confident that government's going to solve and manage the risks that they're worried about that keep them up at night.
But this is one of our problems, is that when things aren't going well here, we like start, and finger pointing is natural, but all of our problems are not the federal government. Just like Kelvin says, they're not going to solve our problems. They're also not the reason that we are totally here. A part of it, I think I said this a couple weeks ago, last time that McCann just draws this out of me. He's very sinister this way, Lyndsey. We're part of the problem.
We are.
We're part of the problem.
We are. And so this is where, and perhaps at some point we come to a reckoning on this, in that I think that our industry, if let's try and keep it somewhat smaller, as an industry, we feel like our government has failed us and isn't really showing leadership on policy and is in a lot of ways getting in the way. Canada as a whole has been moving towards the government doing more for them, the government taking care of everything. So I think that it does make sense when you think about it from that perspective of the agriculture industry is sort of, one of the consequences. How we feel about how the government is handling agriculture is a consequence of Canada as a whole pushing towards more government involvement. And it begs the question, and it comes to the point of personal responsibility to not just take care of ourselves, but each other. And so this is a conversation we've been having sort of behind the scenes of this discussion, is that if we don't take care of each other, and whatever that looks like, creating jobs, charity work, volunteering, involvement in your community, if we don't take care of each other, we still have needs that need to be met. We still have to have roof a roof over our heads. We still have to eat. We need to take care of people. So if we don't do it on an individual and community basis, then we look to the government to do it. And that's why we're here. That's how we got here. Go ahead.
Sorry, Lindsay, because I think that I think what we need to do is have a much more thoughtful debate about what can government do, right? So one of the risks that we see concern people is access to rural broadband. That is a good example where government has a really important role in bridging that. Government policy around broadband access is a big part of fixing that problem. But on the flip side, we see something like input cost as a big concern that people have. We see that people are not confident that government can solve it. It's not government's job to make inputs cheaper, but government could play a role trying to invest in new technology development and helping give farmers more tools to drive down input use, to give them the tools that farmers themselves need to manage it. So it's not that there's always government needs to fix it. Again, government's job is not to make inputs cheaper, but government could play a job if it was really going to be thoughtful about it and helping give farmers the tools they need to manage those costs.
And here's the other reality from a regulatory standpoint. If somebody developed a product, say in the U.S., that allowed you to use, 40% less fertilizer, could you even get it registered here? Like, how long would that process take? That's a problem.
Well,
that's something government needs to fix.
Yeah. So I guess.
Go
ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that I think that's one of the reckoning sort of conversations we have to have is what is a government role? Like to Tyler's point, what is the role of government, and what are the things that realistically as an industry or as an individual we take responsibility for and we don't necessarily want government involved with. And so unfortunately, when it comes to conversations or campaigns, etc., it isn't the most exciting thing to talk about to reduce red tape. But that's a really important thing that, our producer organizations and things are focused on, because it does actually have a big impact, or could potentially have both a negative impact if there's too much or a positive impact of getting out of the way. And so unfortunately, though, that's not the most interesting topic. And so it doesn't necessarily get people fired up and engaged. And that's where, again, sometimes we have to pay attention to the things that are less fun to discuss because they actually really matter.
Okay, Tyler, 15 seconds.
One of the questions we ask is, what vision do people want for the future of policy? One of the options we give them is the typical government one, which is what I call an everything all of the time one, where we want government to do everything. I'm pleased with our early results, which show that people don't see that as the driving force, because that's the other problem we get. Governments want to be everything to everybody, and it gets us bad results on everything at the end of the day. We need more focus. We need more targeted, and hopefully this survey will help draw that.
Yeah, great points. And when I say ourselves, we are to blame, a part of this is, as Canadians in general, taking action and just doing something, as opposed to everything needing to be some sort of a consult and dragging things up. We got lots and lots of examples of that. Great show today. This has been awesome. Tyler, have yourself a great weekend.
Thanks, Shaun.
Lyndsey, all the best. Stay away from those black flies.
I'll try.
And Kelvin, you gonna put any seed in the ground this weekend?
Hoping to maybe get to some soybeans if the rain holds off.
If. Remember, send all that email to Kelvin. He deserves it. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can send me those emails. It's okay. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. We'll, of course, chat again next week. Cheers, everybody. Have a great long weekend. Yahoo!